Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflections LEAP 4.0 convention. My name is Chilizi Rachitanga. I am one of the board members of MISTRA, and I thank you very much for taking your time this afternoon to join us on this important conversation about the fourth industrial revolution. The LEAP 4.0 convention is part of MISTRA's project on the fourth industrial revolution, which focuses on the impact of 4IR in our society. MISTRA wishes to catalyze policy action in this regard. At the outset, I must give thanks to the Department of Science and Innovation, which has sponsored this MISTRA project on the fourth industrial revolution. The theme of our convention today is Marua Pula. This is a Setswana phrase which means rain clouds. And as you may know, the rain clouds are associated with a promise for blessings and opportunities to come. But they can also be a warning sign for thunderstorms and floods that may be caused by torrential rains. So this is the reason why we have decided to give this phrase Marua Pula as the theme of our convention, because the fourth industrial revolution discourse is steeped in an anticipation of what is to come. The convention is being conducted virtually, which means that you will be requested to participate in a virtual way from the platform of the webinar and the Zoom chat room. I would like to just make an announcement that we are going to field questions from all participants through the Q&A box on the chat room, and not the chat room box. The Q&A box is where you should write down your questions as the speakers are speaking, and we are then going to select those questions and field them to our panelists. Now, we are going to have a set of plenary sessions and as well as breakaway sessions that we call techno shops. To begin with, we will start the convention with a setting of the scene. We have very esteemed panelists. In fact, throughout the day today, in our convention, we have a group of very diverse expert panelists who represent different sectors of our society, including government, academia, business, and civil society. And now we are going to start our convention by setting the scene insofar as the theme of this convention is concerned. We have two panelists with us at this point. We have Ms. Zamanzima Mazibuko Makena. She is the Senior Researcher, Knowledge, Economy, and Scientific Advancement at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. She is joined by Mr. Imran Patel, Deputy Director General, Socio-Economic Innovation Partnerships at the Department of Science and Innovation. They will each do a presentation for 5 minutes as a way of setting the scene for our convention, and thereafter we will field some questions for them. As I have requested, please, if you have a question, right during the time when they are making their presentations, please go into the Q&A box and then type out your question. We will then field it to them after their presentations. Let me welcome Ms. Zamanzima Mazibuko Makena from MISTRA to give us her input. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all. So I think one of the biggest things about the 4IR on our continent is making sure that it leaves no one behind. In a few months' time, MISTRA will launch a publication that interrogates the societal value of the fourth industrial revolution and its broader societal impact in South Africa and other parts of the continent. So the book explores some of the ways we can ensure that the 4IR is just, is inclusive and sustainable, and how it can be a tool to achieve South Africa's socio-economic objectives. The authors in the book apply a critical lens to the notion of the 4IR, highlighting the limitations of importing or even just transplanting international notions of the 4IR to a developing context without adequately addressing the preconditions that need to be in place for implementation of the 4IR.
I have none at the moment.
Essentially, the book argues for equitable distribution of advanced technologies and their benefits. It aims to expand the 4IR debate beyond purely economic or technological perspectives to include broader social, cultural, and policy perspectives. What the book does is argue for complementary policies with 4IR strategies to ensure that we are not just using the 4IR as a blanket solution, but as a tool to enable us to achieve what we aim to achieve. So we look at how emerging technologies in general need to be inclusive. There needs to be an inclusive innovation in advanced technologies. We have chapters that look at language, how our languages are not part of the 4IR. And if we were to actually have the 4IR on the African continent, we need to ensure that it's using languages that we use on the continent. We look at the ethics of 4IR and how the people that actually design these technologies, we need a more transdisciplinary way in designing our technologies, because technologies are not designed in a vacuum. The people that design them actually have an influence how these technologies work. So we need to make sure that we have co-creation when we actually develop these technologies to ensure that the people that need to use them actually benefit from these technologies. Then we look at the human capability formation, because we need to actually upskill people in order to enable them to use these technologies. We need to ensure that in government, in private sector, in civil society, people are skilled and they actually participate fully in the 4IR. And we also need to ensure that these technologies are not detrimental to the environment either. So they need to benefit the people of the continent, but they also need to ensure that the environment stays intact. The equitable access to technologies is a very important part of what the book talks about to prevent the exacerbation of existing inequalities. The need for inclusive, ethical, and sustainable innovation, and very importantly, governance and regulation of 4IR technologies and their impact in society is quite important, because we have technologies that are developing faster than where the regulations are. So we need to make sure that we work hand in hand to ensure that the technologies that are developed actually are regulated. And we look at, example, digital technologies where, for instance, Uber or even Airbnb, the technologies that have moved in the services area, in the hospitality and tourism areas, but there hasn't been adequate regulation for those technologies, and hence there is disputes and fighting amongst people in that sector. Once we have these technologies, we need to ensure that they come into an environment that actually regulates them and makes it fair for all players. And of course, the skills, education, and public sector capacity that is required for the 4IR is very important. So these are the themes that come across in the book that we argue that are very important, and not use the 4IR as the panacea for our issues on the continent. We actually are in a place where the previous industrial revolutions, we're still struggling to grapple with those technologies and actually having them in place. So with the 4IR, we need to actually ensure that those preconditions that are required, the data inequality, our electricity, access to electricity, those are the things that we need to make sure they are in place in order for us to actually adequately harness the benefits of the 4IR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zamanzi Ma. I think that was quite an important explanation of the project that MISTRA is involved in focusing very much on what would the impact be. There's been a lot of discourse and conversation in our country about the technical aspects of the fourth industrial revolution, but MISTRA wants to take the angle of understanding impact on the people, impact on the person, the ordinary person on the ground. So now, Zamanzima, you spoke very importantly about regulation. Which areas of the state do you think should be thinking about the different types of regulation that is needed to make sure that this 4IR revolution does not leave people worse off than the promises that it brings?
Well, because the 4IR is about disrupting dimensions of the entire human experience and disrupting industries and sectors across board, everyone needs to be aware of what regulations are needed for their own sector, because there is no sector that will be left untouched. So from the Department of Environmental Affairs to the arts to DSI, everyone is affected. So as I mentioned previously, there's the hospitality and tourism sectors, but then there's also the health sector, because 4IR technologies are also aiming to improve our health system. So even our ministers our ministers of health and such, they need to be aware of what regulations are needed in place, because they need to ensure that those who are already privileged, those who already make up the 20% of people in private healthcare are not the only ones that benefit from 4IR in health. We need to ensure that everyone actually benefits. So it's actually everyone. It's no one should be relaxing. Everyone needs to be aware and cognizant of how the 4IR will impact their space.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Zama. So we have a question from Sedika Davis, who asks, benefits of 4IR cannot be implemented without access to information within digital multiverses. Does the book cover this, or the project that MISTRA is involved in? Does it cover this aspect? Zama?
It does. The book does speak about the inequalities that we find ourselves in. It talks about data inequality specifically and how that could be a limitation in trying to implement the 4IR. It speaks about the environmental aspects of the 4IR and how climate change mostly impacts the most vulnerable, the most poor of the society. So when we implement the 4IR in that sector, we also need to just ensure that the people that are left most vulnerable actually benefit from introducing such a technology, that they are not further entrenched in the inequality. So yes, the book does touch a lot on those benefits and how not being intentional about implementing the 4IR and intentional about the policies to protect the most vulnerable could lead to further exacerbation of our inequalities.
Thank you, Zama. I will now take the last question that is fielded by Rodin Khrevan. I hope I'm pronouncing your surname well. And the worry here is that government works in such hierarchies and silos. So does intergovernmental relations work that would make sure that the interdependencies of 4IR can be accommodated?
It is an issue. Government does work in silos, and this is a conversation that is had in many different platforms, in many different areas and spheres. So with the 4IR, there needs to be more integrated systems in governance, because, as I said, all departments are impacted on the 4IR. If we were to introduce it, every single department needs to know how it impacts their department. So we need to ensure that, government needs to ensure that there is that relationship and they stop working in silos, because these technologies affect everyone. And then you need to realize that what you do in your department affects another department, because with the communications department, whatever technologies they use, they need to use them in other sectors. So then there needs to be more communication in whichever technology is decided to be implemented in the country, and in different sectors. Those people in those sectors need to be communicating with all the other departments.
Much, Zamanzima, for your input and your address. And I hope that your project really succeeds and you take into consideration the discussions that will be had today in this important convention. I would just like to make one housekeeping announcement. We request all participants to please mute their mics so that we can hear the panelists well. For those that might have joined just now, this is the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflections LEAP 4.0 convention. Please, you are welcome to this convention this afternoon. We will be participating virtually. If you wish to ask a question during panel discussions, please go to the Q&A box and type your question right there. I would now like to ask Mr. Imran Patel from the Department of Science and Innovation to please give us his input.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Dr. Rachitanga, and my fellow panelists, and greetings to everyone who has joined this very, very important convention. The Department of Science and Innovation is proud to support such efforts, particularly one like this, which is close to my heart, which looks at the issue of the fourth industrial revolution from a perspective that is not biased towards the technology. I mean, there's a lot of engagements that looks at the 4R and what artificial intelligence is going to do, etc., but to focus it in a slightly different way. So in terms of setting the scene, I think we need to step back. The whole issue of the fourth industrial revolution has gained a lot of currency. And I think it's created a bit of a problem because the word industrial revolution is core to the 4R. Historically, the terminology emerged and caught on in the World Economic Forum circles, guided by what was happening in Germany at the time, etc. Personally, I prefer some of the alternative approaches that have emerged. For example, Japan, they talk about Society 5.0, because we're dealing with a societal transformation based on the pace and the scale and the convergence of various technologies that come together in interesting ways. And one of the ways in which we're beginning to think about this more and more is the Department of Science and Technology, Science and Innovation, is through this concept of socio-technical systems. And so even the earlier presentation spoke about various economic sectors, tourism, manufacturing, etc. But that's part of Society 5.0. It's not the complete Society 5.0. I think a better way of looking at it is to look at the system of provisioning certain things, whether it's energy, whether it's education, whether it's food, whether it's security, whether it's water, etc. These represent various socio-technical systems, and we're working with a number of researchers globally who are looking at the transformative power of innovation, but directed towards socio-technical systems. And I think the SDGs give us a good framework around the types of socio-technical systems that we need to focus on. So the real issue then is, how do you make sure that these socio-technical systems in their transformation on the basis of technologies, whether it's digital technologies, biological technologies, or physical technologies, can be made more fairer, more equitable, more human-centric, more beneficial to the environment. And so like food is a good example. How do we then redesign the food system to be able to do this on the back of technology? So hopefully this approach of socio-technical systems, which I hope will gain more and more currency in the way we think about it, will in fact naturally force the debate away from the technologies to what these technologies are meant to change, what are they meant to enable, etc. Now, in that context, let me just highlight a few areas of focus of the Department of Science and Innovation at the moment. Firstly, as part of our mandate, and this will continue so that the researchers are working in particular areas of focus, don't have to see a threat in terms of continuing their work, but we will continue supporting particular technology areas because we need to deepen our capabilities. For example, artificial intelligence. Very important technology. We have a consortium of different universities that have come together and together with the CSR, called the Center for Artificial Intelligence Research, where they're able to deepen their understanding, the use, the application of artificial intelligence through research, through human capital development. That will continue. Similarly, we have projects, national collaborative programs in blockchain, in data science, in quantum computing, etc. And these will continue because then you need to deepen capabilities in the building blocks that make up the fourth industrial revolution. And those go beyond digital technologies. So, for example, we have the collaborative program on additive manufacturing that focuses on 3D printing and additive manufacturing. Similarly, we have other initiatives around robotics, around nanotechnology, around biotechnology, and I see that the techno shops have that focus, which is good. So step one is to deepen and strengthen this on the understanding that the country needs core and basic capability to take this forward. However, because we're a small system of innovation, and I think a previous speaker also highlighted the need for us to be purposeful, to have some directionality. What the DSI is introducing through something that we call a Converging Technologies platform is to be able to harvest what is happening in these technological areas in a deep way towards a particular end, and that end is in relation to a particular socio-technical system. So as an example, how can we draw on artificial intelligence research, space technologies, biotechnology, etc., to improve the lot of small-scale farmers, because we know that the kind of large-scale farming that predominates the world have unintended consequences in terms of environmental degradation. So how do you bring these different technologies together to be able to solve a particular problem? And that's what the Converging Technologies platform is going to try to do. New, but it's the very important global debate in science and technology policy circles is how do you give what is called directionality to people who are developing this. So we have this in the case of mining, where a number of private sector players together with government have come together, harvesting some of these technologies, whether it's robotics or artificial intelligence or data science or connectivity, to look at next generation mining. So I think that's an important approach. And I think this approach of using a socio-technical systems lens also allows you, very importantly, and this is the kind of second comment that I want to highlight in relation to the significance and the importance of the work that MISTRA is doing to focus on a human-centric technological change, because you need to combine these developments with an understanding of how those socio-technical systems are changing in a sense. And that's why the terminology of socio-technical, not just the focus on the technical, but the focus on the social, because power relations change, human relations change, the way society is organized change, etc. And you need to bring in those various disciplines together, first in an interdisciplinary way, but then you need to combine that with important stakeholder communities to ensure that people's voices are heard, etc. So it doesn't matter whether it's trade unions, etc. So that's a kind of a second focus, that using a socio-technical lens allows you, we've always grappled with this, how do you bring the natural science and the social science together? I think this provides an approach because it enables one to look at particular systems of provisioning. For example, food again. What are the technologies that influence the food system, but what are the social relations, dietary requirements, culture? For example, Muslim people fast, that changes the system in a particular way. Large numbers of people are vegetarian, that changes the way, the system in a particular way. Two last comments that I want to highlight because I think they're quite crucial and they have been identified by the previous input, and that is the issue of technology governance. Clearly, technology governance, which goes beyond regulation, it's also voluntary standards amongst private sector players, setting the rules. A lot of times, the power of technology is dampened because the global players haven't necessarily come together to define standards, to define governance arrangements, etc. And one of the things we have done in that regard as the Department of Science and Innovation is to partner with the World Economic Forum to establish an affiliate center called the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, where the focus is on technology governance. But the way to evolve technology governance is to do it in two ways: to do it by doing things, not just talking about it, but experimenting with it, putting in place certain measures and seeing how they work, modifying it and changing it. But very importantly, to do this in a multi-stakeholder way, to make sure that all stakeholders are there to shape the agenda. And some of the areas of priority that we focus on for the South African Center is the critical issue of data policy and data privacy as a particular area of focus. So that's the kind of second last point that I want to highlight. And then the final is this issue of government working in silos, in a sense. And the Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies, and if we talk about socio-technical system, has widespread application. And I think as a society, we need to identify what are the critical wins that we need to direct our efforts towards. One that I feel passionately about, and which is one of the themes of the techno workshops that are here today, is the system of knowledge production, which includes the system of education. I think with South Africa capabilities and approach of EdTech, and also our deep social science knowledge about pedagogy and language, etc., we have a unique opportunity to bring that together to look at the future of education and work. In that way, get various players, doesn't matter whether it's DTI then can use its instruments to support the industrial base around education technology. So it's this concept of mission-orientated innovation, which I think is the flavor of the month globally. And I think in South Africa, we can benefit around that. So again, direct the 4R towards particular missions using a socio-technical system approach and change. And that is, in sense, the kind of philosophical approach that we have adopted in the 2019 White Paper on Science and Technology. And we're busy evolving this new way of doing things. It's taking a while, but I think eventually this way of managing the science, technology, and innovation system will yield a lot more benefits for outcomes like economic growth, social justice, etc. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Patel, and giving that that sense of the government side of things. How is the government marshalling? How is the government marshalling the 4IR evolution in South Africa? For those who have just joined us, welcome. This is the Makpungubye Institute for Strategic Reflections LEAP 4.0 convention, where we are talking all things Fourth Industrial Revolution and focusing specifically on how 4IR impacts our society. There are a few questions for you, Mr. Patel. The first one that I would like to give you is from Tebu Hosijane, who's asking whether there is a single vision for South Africa regarding 4IR and what South Africa wants to achieve from a 4IR perspective. Now, I myself know that there are so many agencies that are working on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. In my other hat, I am the chairman of the Innovation Hub, which is a Gauteng agency, also working on 4IR. I know that the national government has the Innovation Agency. I think it's subscribed to the Department of Science and Innovation, and many other provinces of our country have their own innovation agencies that are working on 4IR. The private sector also has numerous initiatives, and one would wonder whether there is a converging point. We know that our president established the 4IR Commission that is headed by himself and deputized by Professor Chilidzima Rwala, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg. Is that perhaps where everything comes together? The question is whether there is a single vision in terms of how our country would like to marshal this evolution of 4IR. Mr. Patel?
I'd like to answer that question by, in fact, downplaying the fourth industrial revolution, as I tried to argue in my opening remarks. I think we need to strengthen that national vision that is contained. It needs some modification here and there. We need to debate things, but in the National Development Plan. The 4R technologies are means to an end. It's not an end in itself. I think and that's why I personally prefer the way in which the Japanese are thinking about this when they talk about Society 5.0. So if we use that lens, then you see it in a slightly different way, because then you look at it in terms of multiple visions. For example, in the education space now, I think there is increasingly convergence around how is it that we can transform our education system on the back of digital technologies, and it's coming together and it's creating the space, in fact prompted by COVID, to say that when you want to do a new way of delivering education, you need to deal with it comprehensively. You need to deal with the infrastructure in the schools, you need to deal with teacher training, which higher education and training needs to do. You need to look at what's happening in the classroom around basic education. If Department of Public Works are building schools, you need to think about the types of schools that would be amenable to 4R technologies, etc. So this question about whether we have a single vision, I think the vision that we need to focus on is the vision of the kind of society we want, and then understand what is the role of 4R. I think if you want to develop a common vision around the 4R technologies, in a sense, I'm not too sure whether you would get that, because large numbers of our people are not touched by the kind of technologies we talk about. To ensure that it meets their requirements, we need to talk about it in ways that make sense for their language, about 4R technologies helping to become more food secure, to have better education, etc. And that vision is there in the NDP, and it's been continuously re-emphasized through the approach now being adopted by government of building social compacts between the different government departments, with the private sector, etc. So that's a different way of answering the question, do we have a common vision? I think we have a common vision of the kind of society we want to create. We don't yet have a good sense of how we see the 4R helping us create that society, and that's where we need to do things. And my view is that you need to develop a human-centric approach, focus on the needs of people, and then marshal the appropriate 4R technologies.
Thank you. I think that is a perfect way of looking at it. And we hope that all the practitioners and companies and governments that are working on this innovation will look at it that way. We need to remember we are a country of millions of people that are unemployed, a country of millions of people who are poverty-stricken. 4IR should be looked at, according to Mr. Patel, in terms of how it's going to aid in creating a better society for those kinds of people. And I think this segues very well to the point you made earlier on, which is that you have a socio-technical approach to your interface with 4IR. And this is interesting because we have always spoken about socio-political, socio-economic, and 4IR has now brought us to the reality to think about the socio-technical manner in which we are going to react to these revolutions. Now, the last question I would like to field for you, Mr. Patel, is from Anonymous. What are some of the challenges the Department of Science and Innovation faces as coordinator of the National System of Innovation in the context of 4IR? Just briefly, and then we can wrap up. Thank you.
I think the answer in Anonymous's question is in the question. It's that issue of coordination. I think that's our primary challenge at the moment. How do we make sure we are a very small system? We're not as big as China or the US in terms of the number of scientists and practitioners and entrepreneurs that we have. How to bring these people together in a cohesive way where we're then working towards common mission. So that remains our first challenge. And then to do that, you need resources. And I think this is where we need all support that we can get, because I think the science system is a system that is underappreciated in a sense. I think in a way, as part of our transformation of society, we have to mobilize for a lot more resources to go into research, development, and innovation, because that's where some of the solutions to our problem lie. So it's coordination and money.
So much. Thank you, Mr. Patel. And I think we are quite excited to know that there is a hugely focused and concentrated effort by government to coordinate how society is really impacted by 4IR and how 4IR should actually be looked at in terms of how it aids in the transformation of our society to impact the most vulnerable. Thanks, Zamanzima, also for your input. That brings to an end our first session, which was really setting the scene for this important convention. We are now going to move into the next plenary session. This is going to be the keynote address of today's convention. The topic for this keynote address is Utopia or Dystopia: Robots, Wizards, Unicorns, and Other Heroes or Villains of the 4IR. It's going to be presented by none other than Ms. Rapelang Rabana, who is a founder of Rekindle Learning. While we get into this session, I would like for you to just listen and view this short video. Thank you.
We have a techno shop focusing on arts and humanity vis-a-vis the 4IR. And it's exciting because if you think about it, one of the quintessential traits that make us human is creativity. And what happens when AI can write books, can paint?
Young people are realizing that 4IR is important. You can see that they are in fact bringing a lot of energy, innovation and excitement to 4IR, arts and the humanities.
If you're a young person, this techno shop will energize you.
The techno shop on biotechnology is incredibly fascinating and interesting for me because biotechnology is in fact all around us. It's in our food, it's in water.
Just think about a technology that can reduce particles to their most minute state. And the reason why we think that they're important is just because they're simply diverse and unparalleled in terms of the technology in which they can be applied. So our key question is, to what extent can bio and nanotechnology be used to mitigate and ultimately eradicate inequality and poverty?
We understand that ideas move the world. Ideas move economies, ideas move politics and social lives. So we do understand that the sharing and the movement of knowledge across space, cultures, and people is incredible, and it is in fact shaping the current future.
So in this techno shop, we want to spark the debate around knowledge production. The second objective that we have is to empower people, ensuring that they have chances to access much needed information that informs their very human existence. Knowledge is power.
Humans have always been using tools But because of the recent advances in technology, we're beginning to have machines that can augment us in all sorts of interesting ways.
I was the first person in the world to be able to voluntarily move my legs while stepping in a robot by exciting the nervous system using electrical stimulators directly onto the spine. We believe that a cure will be possible if enough of the right people have the will to fast-track a cure for paralysis.
We take two things from the patient. First, we take a three-dimensional X-ray, and we extract the three-dimensional data out of that so we can make a perfectly shaped puzzle piece. And then we also take a sample of fat tissue from the patient so that we can extract the stem cells out of those. And we use those stem cells with this three-dimensional scaffold that we fabricate, and after 3 weeks, we have a piece of living bone that's ready for implantation.
Being able to use genome editing to understand the genetic changes that lead to cancer, and technologies like drug delivery, getting molecules into particular types of cells. There's a lot of excitement about being able to move much more quickly on this disease.
One of the things that I think is so essential to free and open societies is freedom of thought. And up until now, the conversation we've been having is around freedom of speech. Once we can access people's thoughts and access people's emotion, we have to create a space that enables people to think freely, to think divergent thoughts, to think creative thoughts. And in a society where people fear having those thoughts, the likelihood of being able to enjoy progress is significantly diminished.
We need to take responsibility at every level of society, from the individual and the personal to the institutional to the global, to adapt to these technological challenges and changes which are redefining what it means to be human, what it means to work, what it means to be completely embedded in this world.
People always ask me if I'm an optimist or a pessimist. The technology exists, but how do we get it and implement it at the scale we need at a price that people around the world can afford?
Even though we have everyday problems we have to solve, we have to find a way to lay the foundations for the innovations of tomorrow.
Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that short video about the fourth industrial revolution and the kind of discussions and conversation we would like us to have through this convention today. I now have the single most honor to welcome Ms. Rapelang Rabana, who's going to give us the keynote address on the topic of utopia or dystopia, robots, wizards, unicorns, and other heroes or villains of the fourth industrial revolution. Now, Ms. Rapelang Rabana is founder of Rekindle Learning and Rekindle Digital. She's an internationally loaded technology entrepreneur. As a founder of this venture of Rekindle Learning, she's also a partner in the private equity Nisela Capital, and she holds a business science degree as well as an MSc, and is a firm believer that there's a better and simpler, more effective way to do things through technology. Welcome, Rapelang, and thank you for gracing us.
It's an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed that panel discussion that you were leading earlier, and I think it fits quite well into our conversation now around this utopia or dystopia. And a lot of the time when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, a lot of it is about us being almost victims or objects to this external power that's going to change our lives. Are we really doomed to be at the mercy of robots? Are we thinking about technology the right way? I'm really going to challenge some of that thinking. And before I do, let me give you a bit more context. I've been in the technology space for the last 15 years, really. So I was a digital native before digital was even a word. And on that journey, I'm really going to glean some of those learnings and insights, because they formed how I see the world and why I'm a lot more optimistic about what we might be able to get out of the fourth industrial revolution. I started my first business straight after university from UCT with a couple of my classmates, and we developed Yago, essentially a very early version of your mobile VoIP, your WhatsApp calls and Viber calls, but incredibly early in 2006. But that journey for me was really critical in showing me that regardless of your wealth status, regardless of how well positioned you are in society, you can use the internet to dramatically change your life outcomes. Because as a group of students without any social or financial capital, we were able to build world-class technology at a time when it was really difficult to develop that technology. And the internet has been an incredible lever in my life. I've always remained in the technology space, and at the moment I'm running a number of ventures. Rekindle Digital, as was mentioned, is really focused on how we have these kinds of conversations and help large companies and small companies navigate the digital transformation journey so that we can make sure that we drive revenue, reduce costs, enhance customer experience, and improve the employee experience as well. In my work at Rekindle Learning, we're really looking at how we make sure that we take people along for this journey, because without that, we're going to get some of the negative consequences of the 4IR. So our mission is really around how do we empower people to adapt to the changing world of work. So I hope you can see that through this work, we're able to touch sort of various sectors of community, my favorite being the work we're doing with first-year university students who are battling to reach the levels of English proficiency that are required to ensure that they can succeed and complete their degrees on time. And with all of these experiences, you can imagine why I'm a lot more optimistic about what is going to happen for us. But let me get into the conversation and really unpack these concepts of utopia versus a utopia. And I'm going to look at sort of three main areas in this conversation. The first is, why are we here? Why is the 4IR relevant now? Then I'm going to look at how we actually start overcoming our fears and misconceptions about it. And finally, I'm going to look at how we work towards achieving a utopia. So let's get into the sort of first conversation, and let me start by setting some background and context to the fourth industrial revolution by looking back really at the previous revolutions. Initially with the first industrial revolution, it was really brought about by new techniques in how we manage water and steam to drive manufacturing processes. And then our source of energy changed to electric power. And ultimately, we got to the third industrial revolution, which was really much more about leveraging electronic communications and computers to be able to do our work. And a lot of the things that we're afraid of now, automation, the rise of computerization and cloud computing, are actually third industrial revolution technologies. And yet they're pervasive, and the world hasn't ended, and we're not victims of machines yet. The fourth industrial revolution is actually quite different. It blurs the line between the physical, the biological, the digital, and takes us to a completely different place of how we engage with each other and objects. And the kinds of technologies that we're looking at there is stuff like virtual reality or augmented reality. We're looking at things like 3D printing. We're looking at nanotechnology and the kind of implants that you put in your body. That's really the next stage of technology that's going to drive the kind of change that we're imagining. What brought us to this point? There's a couple of dynamics I like to think about and when we consider what brought us to this point of the fourth industrial revolution. And a number of them have been mentioned already, but just to quickly summarize, it's this dramatic increase in devices that are available in the world today, and the fact that there are more mobile phones on the planet than people will give you a sense of just how dramatic that increase is. Coupled with that is the increase in the amount of data we generate. Just in a single minute, the amount of data we generate on YouTube, on WhatsApp, is more than we ever did in the previous century, for example, combined. And then we've got the huge upsurge of computing power that drives a lot of the cloud computing and quantum computing services that we're driving and using. All of this has been made possible by a dramatic reduction in costs that has made producing devices, providing connectivity and more computing power affordable. Those are just the basics of the technology that has brought us to today. A key thing I want to point out that we often overlook is the role of how we change or share data that has also evolved over this time. How we share knowledge and expertise has a huge impact on how society develops. And way back when we were just doing storytelling, we was really relying on oral mechanisms to share expertise and data. And the only people that were really great were the ones with a great memory, right? And then we were able to move to a world where we wrote scripts. And for those that are movie watchers or series watchers, I was a big fan of Game of Thrones. And there was a lot of the scripts that were written in the Citadel. And at that time, that was the best way to share knowledge and expertise for generations to come. Then we got the printing press that allowed us to produce books and journals and dramatically increased how much we could share with each other. And that brought us to the point today where we have digital technologies, which has exploded, literally, our capacity to share knowledge and expertise. And without this journey, we wouldn't be at the 4IR stage either. The other dynamics are the things that we see and experience, more macroeconomic dynamics. So things like the changes on the African continent. We've seen that there's a huge demographic dividend, mass urbanization, a huge young workforce. And these are the kind of dynamics that are putting pressure on how we live and work and forcing us to change how we produce products and services so that they are more accessible and more affordable. It's becoming more and more evident that we can't, keep educating, keep providing healthcare at the way we've been doing it if we're going to be able to tackle and support this huge demographic dividend. The other macroeconomic dynamic is really the impact of COVID-19. Much like previous world wars and when society was, unstable and in chaos, we have been able to tap into technology and accelerate our use and the maturity of technology much faster when we are under pressure, like in a situation of COVID-19. And we've seen that in, the rapid pace at which we're able to start building vaccines. And these kind of pressures always escalate or accelerate our path on this journey. So those are the dynamics that I look at when we think about why are we here. And it's always important for me to note that in my mind because it just sets some context that this isn't some black sort of flash of magic that has brought us here. There's been dynamics emerging over centuries that have brought us here. So on to sort of my second point, which is really looking at how we start overcoming our fears. And the funny thing is that most of the time when we think about AI, we imagine sort of the scariest movie of all time, and we imagine sort of being consumed by a machine and not being able to sort of decide what happens. And this is a typical reaction out of pure fear, really, the scary stuff of sci-fi movies in a way. And I don't think it sort of has to be that way. We also imagine a black box in many cases, a black box where, stuff goes in and machines come and tell us what to do from there. And we can't quite figure out what's going on inside that black box, which gives us, that sense of trepidation or sort of fear. But my challenge when we think about that black box was human intelligence as we know it today transparent? And it wasn't transparent. We don't necessarily know what goes on in a doctor's mind, for example, when they are making a diagnosis. We know that they're well educated. We know that they've got tacit knowledge from the experience that they've had. And we know that they also leverage their gut feel. But it's not necessarily a definitive thing that we understand because doctors and judges and lawyers can all come to different conclusions. So we shouldn't get stuck in an idea that there was full transparency in how we made decisions as a society or how we thought. A lot of our lives are still a black box to some extent. And in many ways, I think that when we set the right ethical boundaries for AI, when we ensure that the teams that work on AI products are diverse, when we ensure that the data inputs that we put in for machine learning are actually representative of the society they will deliver services to, when we do those things, we actually have a much better chance of ensuring that the decision making in that black box actually serves our needs as a society. We live in a world now where people have biases, they have extreme views, and they often go on to become presidents, and we don't need to look very far to see that. And are we able to go into their heads and change it? Are we able to direct it? Not really. So in many ways, we are suffering from human black boxes. So do we need to imagine that the AI black box is actually that bad? One of my favorite thinkers in the AI space is Vivian Ming. And she made the joke that we think about AI the same way we think about fairies and demons and angels, which isn't the best way, right? Because it's not a fairy tale book we're going through. So I want to just clarify in more detail a couple of the things that we need to understand about AI. Right now as a society, we're at a place that we refer to as narrow AI. This is a stage where a machine can take in a set of complex instructions, execute something, and give an output. So we're a very long way away from producing digital babies that we're not able to control. And what I like to emphasize is that there are things that machines can do exceptionally well. They can go through a lot more data. They can compute and calculate at rates that we could never be able to do given the constraints of our brain. They can recognize patterns. And we need to leverage that as opposed to seeing that negatively. Human beings, on the other hand, can do the stuff that some machines still can't on the right-hand side here. We're able to define the tasks and what we should focus on, while machines are not necessarily able to decide what to do. They're able to do what you tell them to do, but deciding what to do is actually a big part of the thinking process that still sticks with human beings. Computers are not able to source their own data inputs to be able to decide what data to use. They're not able to qualify decisions to be able to decide which goals in our life and society we should actually be valuing more than others. Whenever there's a trade-off in decision making, we still rely on human beings to be able to close that gap for us. Machines are not able to negotiate. They're not able to create from the very beginning. They're able to take models and things that people have created and do them at a much faster pace. So when we look at this diagram, really, my view is that we should be combining what machines can do with what the humans can do, that machines can't do. Later on, in the next 30 to 50 years, we're going to see the emergence of broader or general artificial intelligence. But if we make sure that we use this time productively, we can set the foundation and pillars of how more advanced AI can be used in the future. It is critical, I believe, that we move away from this thinking of either or, utopia or dystopia, because it's not actually that kind of dichotomy. In my mind, we need to combine machine and people's capabilities to achieve better outcomes in our society. And this utopia-dystopia thing is even more unrealistic for me, because when we look at our current situation as a continent, as a society, can we really say that we are in a utopia? So this imagination of a dystopia later, as opposed to the dystopia we're facing now, sort of shifts our priorities in the wrong direction. When we look at the state of our continent, we're still battling a number of socioeconomic challenges. There is significant social inequality based on the Gini coefficients of a number of African countries. We are still facing chronic unemployment that is only accelerated with the advent of COVID-19. We are still battling to provide skills to the people that need it, as we saw with the Fees Must Fall protests in the previous years. We are still battling other things, new diseases, and COVID is a classic example where medical health care is not keeping up with the demands of today. We're battling climate change and the impact that has on food security, and as well as our environment and our health. When we look at these challenges, we must ensure that we don't presume that the current status quo is what's actually good and the future can be bad. This current status quo is actually a big challenge. I refer to a book by Hans Rosling called Factfulness, and in there he provides us a great framework of how we should rate or sort of group people based on their current income levels and lifestyles they live, so that we can appreciate just how much we have to do to be able to get people up into the fourth level of society. And in this diagram, you can see that the people on the level 1 are actually the ones living on less than $2 a month. I mean, $2 a day, and are struggling the most. Whereas most of us watching this event and in our schools and work environments are actually living on level 4. People that are able to earn more than $1,000 a month. Can you imagine that there's only 16 million Africans today that are living on level 4? So this shows us that we've got a tremendous way to go and that we're not in a utopia now. So we should be looking at various new mechanisms and ideas to get us forward. One of my favorite leaders and thinkers in the digital space is Walter Rede of Deloitte. And he says that if we take the productivity achieved at the moment through the manual labor and the current ways of working and living over the past few decades and actually extrapolate it into the future, we're going to see linear growth, and our GDP growth isn't going to be able to grow fast enough to support our growth needs, to support our social needs. So is this really the path that we want to be going on? In my mind, we need to evolve much faster than we're doing now. And this is why we need to look at other mechanisms that can help us do more, perform better, operate faster, so that we can open the door for exponential productivity that would be able to provide the products and services and evolution in our society that would meet the needs of all people and bring us all up to level 1 and 4. So this really takes me to the third part, which is the most critical part of my conversation with you, around how we actually go about achieving this utopia. I think that we should take a different perspective on this word called AI. So I'm going to coin a term, accelerated improvement, because I believe we need to look at it as a whole new path to evolution, as opposed to something that will destroy us. Something where we can leverage our human talents and AI to develop faster than we ever have before. When we leave human beings as we are now, it takes us millennia to evolve, to cope and adapt with the complexities of the worlds we find ourselves in. We don't have millennia at this point. And if we use AI, we can get there in a few decades and evolve faster than we ever have. I believe that progress is a wave, and you can decide to take agency and direct the way you want to go, as opposed to stomping your feet or digging in and firmly trying to stop it, which actually isn't even a choice. I believe that we need to move to a different way of thinking, where we look at technology as an opportunity to win with. And this dichotomy of utopia versus dystopia, us or the machine, is actually a false dichotomy. And the win-with is what we need to be thinking about, because I believe when we leverage AI's capabilities, we'll be able to do more, be more efficient, we'll be able to be more productive, we'll be able to develop new products, new services at a lower cost to serve underrepresented markets in level 1, 2, and 3 that are currently not adequately served at the current cost of products and services. We'll be able to see further into the future, to be able to predict what might happen. For example, cancer diagnoses 5 years in advance. These are superpowers that we should be embracing. And I think this fourth industrial revolution does challenge us to question what it means to be human. But this is not too unique. This is not unlike the previous industrial revolutions, because with each of these revolutions, we were compelled to recognize that we were not so good at what we thought we were good at. And we had to take the next step to evolve to realize what we were good at and focus our attention there. The same time when electronic power came, we realized that we're not that strong, actually. So let's transition and move on to do things that we are really good at. We shouldn't get stuck into this thinking that AI will take our jobs. Yes, there are changes. We've seen changes in how, cars took away the journeys for carriage drivers. We've seen how the internet took away video store owners. We've seen how various changes in professions, and we're now seeing that impact on doctors, on lawyers, on financial services, for example. But if we take a step back, we can also appreciate that there will be significantly more opportunities and jobs. And a number of research houses have indicated that from the number of jobs that are actually lost, there could be significantly more that are created. I know that it's easy to feel the loss more than the gain right now, because the gain isn't something we can pinpoint exactly. We often don't have the imagination to think about what could be in the future from the current now. Certainly when electricity came about, most of us couldn't have imagined the escalator, or we couldn't have imagined the washing machine. But that, doesn't mean that we should constrain our thinking and think those kinds of dramatic evolutions won't be available to us with this new industrial revolution. Like the ones before it, we'll be forced to redirect our energies to what we are actually better at. And a key part of arming ourselves to be able to cope with these changes is how we think about skills. I know that it's become incredibly popular to think about developing coders and data scientists and various other advanced technical skills. And no doubt that these skills are absolutely critical for us as Africans to be able to create products and services that serve our interests. But we must remember that we actually need a broad spectrum of digital skills, because if we just had these innovators that develop very advanced tools, who's going to consume them? If we're not all going on a journey to shift our mindsets and adopt new products and services. So a big part of the digital skills that I like to refer to is skills for inclusion. These are skills like knowing how to use the internet and collaboration tools and email addresses so that you can access work opportunities. Tools like cybersecurity, being able to process information, being able to understand the underlying digital capabilities so that you can use them in your work and life. These skills for inclusion, for me, are far more critical, because if business leaders, decision makers don't have these skills for inclusion, how are they going to make buying decisions to procure? How are they going to consume the innovations that are coming from our continent? And if we don't do that, none of our local innovations are actually going to be successful. When we look at advanced economies, those innovations are successful primarily because there are local markets consumed. So it's absolutely critical that all Africans actually increase their digital awareness so that they can consume the new products and services. Finally, I want to talk about the skills required to thrive. And again, these are for everybody. These are skills like communication, collaboration, managing people, skills of creativity, problem solving, and complex decision making and thinking. What's important for me here is that these skills are not skills that are created through our traditional education model of knowledge transfer. We know that you could give, a nurse great content, great material, but that doesn't mean that they will be a great nurse. It requires something else: mindsets, values, behaviors. And these are things that are only built through experiences, through overcoming challenges, through exposure to a broad range of life experiences. So I believe we need to rethink, in particular, the skills and education issue, to not just focus on the what of how we learn, which is the content and the predominant factor in how we think about education, and shift to how we are taught. Because this speaks to creating experiences and challenges people need to overcome in order to develop their mindsets, behavior, and values. This is a completely different approach to education than what I believe we are currently adopting now in our education systems and training programs in particular. How we are taught and how we curate experiences is the next big thing that educators need to master. So instead of mastering how we create amazing content, the next step is how we curate experiences that are just outside of people's comfort zones so that they keep developing and growing. And through that, develop the mindsets and behaviors we seek in today's world. We know that people are going to need to significantly reskill themselves through the years. The World Economic Forum says that 54% of employees will need significant upskilling every 3 years. This is a big number. And I think we need to realize now that content and transferring knowledge over 18 years of school isn't going to be enough to keep up with the rapid change. The half-life of content is reducing dramatically. Graduates in their 4th year today are probably not seeing the relevance of their first-year content. So instead of this drive to push as much content into our brains, we need to shift to understand the underlying capabilities that we need to embed in people so that they're able to adapt and respond to the changing world of work. In my mind, some of those core underlying capabilities are basic literacy and numeracy. Then we require people to actually be able to develop better models or thinking models that allow them to assimilate and consume information, to categorize it, to analyze it, to organize it, so that they're able to keep learning and be able to apply it in their respective fields. I believe we need more systematic ways to understand how we unlock people's creativity and innate problem-solving skills. There's a lot of research that shows that children at a young age have extraordinarily high levels of creativity, and it is our education system and society that beats it out of us. And I think I've gone through a couple of amazing programs for me that demonstrate that adults can actually reconnect with our innate creativity and skills. And this needs to be part of our ongoing sort of training and education. Over and above the creativity and problem solving, I believe the next important part of building adaptability in people is exposure and wide range of experiences. This is the only thing that ensures that the mind is able to cope with uncertainty, change, and unusual situations. And this is what often scares me in the context that we're in South Africa, where a number of children grow up in an environment that isn't stimulating. They may never learn how to swim, how to cross a border, how to ride a horse, how to tackle complex problems in a business. They may not sit around a table with their uncle or their family member and hear about the challenges that they're seeing at work and how they dealt with them. That breadth of experience is what the human mind needs to be able to appreciate all the things that can actually happen in our world today. I think we are actually able to use technology to address this experience or exposure gap. And I think that if we invested significantly in technologies like virtual reality and augmented reality, we would be able to bridge some of this experience gap. In the US, Walmart, for example, has started experimenting with virtual reality for customer service training, for example. And instead of people going and traveling to different parts of the country, they're able to ship the VR headsets to the respective offices, and people are able to go through a series of customer service training programs to be able to build their skills as well as assess where their current ability is. So I'm imagining that we could get to a point where a young person can do a VR experience to prepare for a job interview. And in that VR experience, they have a range of companies that they interact with so that they can understand the types of questions. They're able to get a sense of how their life could be. Imagine going into a VR experience to prepare for a negotiation, to prepare for a team meeting. And when we talk a lot about how young people lack sort of the soft skills, the thinking skills, and how long it takes for them to get these in a corporate context, it's realistic that these are problems given the lack of experience and exposure. And we can almost artificially create these if we invest in AI and VR. And there isn't a continent that needs this more than Africa. A key other part of how we make sure we can achieve this utopia is how we address the lack of products and services and drive economic growth. One of the things that excites me the most when we look at Africa's growth potential is that the number of people on level 1 and level 2 is going to increase dramatically over the next 50, 30 years. And in this graph, the orange and the blue aspects are the ones that illustrate the huge number of growing level 2 and level 3 African citizens. These are the population groups that are going to demand new products and services across all sectors. And we need to recognize that we won't be able to provide healthcare the way we're doing it now for level 2 and 3 at this current cost. So we have to tap into technology, we have to tap into AI to adequately meet the demands of this growing population on the continent. I believe that the next trillion-dollar mega enterprises will be built by the innovators that see this opportunity. And this is across all sectors. When we look at agriculture, for example, food security remains a huge challenge for people on the continent. I think that when we use IoT devices and AI, we're able to overcome some of that. One of the very successful startups in South Africa at the moment, Aerobotics, has actually developed solutions around this. We're using multispectral cameras that fly over certain farm areas. Those cameras are able to zoom in to see, the quality of the crop, whether there are pests, whether it has sufficient nutrition, whether any additional steps need to be taken to ensure that the yield comes out to the quality required. These kind of detailed data sets and insights are able to help farmers predict when their yield will be so that they can better prepare for their products to get to market on time. So can you imagine what we could be able to do if we empowered smallholder farmers with these kinds of technologies? I know that a number of challenges I've seen with smallholder farmers trying to sell into retail stores, for example, is that there's a lot of in-person or manual checking that needs to be done at the farms where inspectors come to visit to check that the quality standards are being observed. Imagine we can do all of that through drones and these kind of cameras and AI. How many more farmers would be able to access traditional retail channels? Because now the ability to inspect and assess quality is democratized and not available to the few who can pay the large figures for those inspections. I think that we would be able to look at other capabilities. In financial services, for example, there will be a lot of demand, not just in agriculture, but even there we need services in insurance, in providing financial and personal advice to be able to support this growing economy of Africans. Healthcare is another big factor that we need to think about. We will not be able to cope with people getting increasingly ill, and we need to look at preventative health care measures that will ensure that people with chronic illnesses actually never get to the hospital. We can get to a point where people can wear wristbands or implants, and people with diabetes or hypertension can be monitored remotely, and we can stop cases getting extremely bad at the point at which they are too costly for our economy to be able to cope. I think that there will also be a number of opportunities to be able to shift people through these levels using healthcare technologies. And I think some of the examples I want to illustrate that really fascinate me in the healthcare space is how we'll be able to use technologies to overcome some disabilities. So a startup called Neosensory, for example, provides wristbands for people that have hearing problems or are deaf. And it takes in the sounds that are happening in their environment, a baby crying, traffic, a dog barking, and then provides vibrations in that wristband that people can learn to read and understand so that they know what they're hearing. There's another startup called Brainport that looks at helping people with visual or sight difficulties. And similarly, they're able to provide a wearable video camera that they can look at. And this camera provides electrical stimulation on your skin or even on your tongue. And people can learn to understand those signals to know what they're seeing. Another startup called OrCam also helps people with visual disabilities by providing something you can clip on your glasses, and it's able to narrate what you're seeing, who is walking towards you to greet you, and that kind of interaction. I can imagine that even people with sight can benefit from that, so that we stop forgetting, people, if something could prompt us as someone comes to us. So I think technology is critical because it transforms the economics of the cost of accessing critical services. In the energy space, using solar power and cloud services linked to the kinds of solar products we're seeing in East Africa, more people can access energy without us having to allocate $1 billion for a new coal plant. The cost of starting a new business has dramatically declined. I certainly remember 15 years ago, we had to spend a fortune on servers to be able to run our systems, and now we can access these services at a fraction of the cost. Technology transforms economics of healthcare so that we can shift from, reactive medicine to preventative medicine. Young people are going to be crucial in driving this shift and change on our continent. We know we are the youngest continent, and by 2035, Africa will have the largest workforce. I imagine that the kinds of times we're in now, these feelings of fear, promise, uncertainty, are much like what we faced post-independence for many African countries. And in the Ghanaian author's book, The Beautiful Ones Are Yet to Be Born, they address some of these dynamics. And I wonder if this current stage of the 4R is sort of similar. And instead of being overwhelmed with anxiety, we need to look at how we architect the future that we want. Referring to Kwame Nkrumah's words, our favorite African leader, he said in 1957, that we shall achieve in a decade what it took us a century to achieve. And we shall not rest until we demolish these miserable colonial structures and erect in their place a veritable paradise. It is more than 50 years since Kwame Nkrumah spoke these words, and we're nowhere close to that paradise. So again, I challenge, what is the utopia we're trying to preserve? It is the dystopia of today that we need to question and leave behind. I believe that the combination of humanity and AI can help us accelerate our path to evolution. We can achieve accelerated improvement through AI, and we can get to a point where we leave the dystopia behind and direct or architect the utopia we truly seek. I cannot personally imagine a more exciting time to be a human being on this planet. Thank you for joining me for this session, and I welcome all the questions that you will have for me post this.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Rapelang. I think that was a mouthful. I'm not going to even try to spoil it, but I really like some of the concepts that you used, that you have coined, such as a digital native, which I believe so many of us still are. And the question of this positive future that you paint for us, where human beings can coexist with with machines, basically, and how much of that is holds such great possibilities for humanity. I wonder if, it's possible to really feel that way if you live in squalor.
Sure.
If you are still facing the basic issues of, I wake up, I do not know whether I will have a glass of water to drink.
Yes.
I don't know if I will have a meal before I sleep, let alone electricity to connect me through the technologies of today to the opportunities brought by artificial intelligence. So I agree with you that we need to, in order to overcome our fears, we need to focus on what machines can do and what humans can do, and enhance the skills that are required for human beings to grow bigger capabilities of what it is that they will remain having to do in coexisting with machines. and use machines to complement that kind of life. But I wonder if all of that is possible when you are really still just facing the basics of being human. Mm-hmm. And this is a great conversation that is spawned by this convention, LEAP 4.0, but it's still happening at an elitist level. It's happening for those that are able to connect to this convention virtually. Mm-hmm. And there are many in the society who don't have access to this. When are we going to engage them at the grassroots level? And shouldn't that also mean that we have to focus on how we can make the language of this conversation accessible to the person on the ground, including translating some of the complex concepts into vernacular, so that the ordinary person on the ground can really understand and see the brilliant future that can emerge out of this coexistence. So I think that's important. My heart was broken this morning when on the TV they were reporting about graduates who do not have jobs. They remain unemployed, even when they have attained qualifications at a tertiary level. And it made me wonder, as you were speaking, whether some of the qualifications of today are not really adapting to the new opportunities that are informed and influenced by 4IR and artificial intelligence. Shouldn't one of the things we have to focus on be on the content of the curriculum and reviewing whether the curriculum that leads thousands of our graduates to go seek employment is complementary to the changes you speak about? Just a few comments on that, and then I will field 2 questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments, Chilisi. Certainly to the first part around, people that are sitting right now without the resources to participate in this 4-hour. This is why I'm saying that it is the people that are on this session, the peoples with resources today, that must go on the journey of developing the new products and services that will serve our current people that are not able to access them. We're not providing services to everyone because we're not using technology to produce clean water as cost effectively as possible. We're not using technology to produce food and distribute it around the country as efficiently as possible. We're not addressing healthcare concerns because we're not transforming how we deliver healthcare. And we must recognize that at this current trajectory, we're not going to be able to achieve that. And this is why using machines and AI is so critical for us to move faster and give us sort of that accelerated improvement so that we can deliver more affordable services to a wider population. And then everyone can begin to be a contributor. I think the other aspect of that comment for me is that while not everyone needs to be entirely proficient in digital technology at all and produce code and data models and the like, we need everyone to have a mobile phone and access to the internet and be able to read and write so that they can consume information, find job opportunities, do some learning. And then we create a broad spectrum of points of engagement for people to participate, I think, in that. To the challenge of skills and where our people are there, it really, really troubles me. Obviously, I spend a great deal of time there in Rekindle Learning. And I think a key problem with just the content that we have is that it doesn't even keep up to date with the topics that need to be addressed. Our regulatory systems are battling to keep up with accreditation of the most critical tools today. And I worry a lot that the incentives that we have for corporate training programs that require various CETA accreditations and the like are not relevant. So companies and institutions are having to divert resources to do a tick box exercise of training and then to address the training that is critical for their business performance today. And we really need to look at that model again so that we're incentivized, or organizations are getting the benefit of investing in skills that actually are relevant for what they need today. Over and above the content, though, I really must go back to sort of the point I was saying before, that content alone isn't going to create great thinkers. There's a lot of neuroscience sort of that backs this up, that Our brains develop truly only when we have experiences that challenge us out of our comfort zones, and that actually develops our neurology to a greater level. And someone who's had a wider variety of experiences and exposure will have a much more developed neurology and therefore are more adaptable to change. And this is why I come back to a question of how do we curate more experiences, even if artificially through VR, to complement real life experiences so that people are actually having immersive learning experiences. And we're not discussing that gap enough.
Thank you for that. A question from one of the participants,
yes,
who hasn't shared their name, is it's indeed important that we do not downplay our agency, but this needs to be deliberate and intentional. What are some of the practical ways human agency and ethics can be accommodated in the coding and commercialization of 4IR technologies? I would like to merge that with Martin Kagwa, who says that technology has proved to be discriminative and segregative. It has made a few people very rich while the majority remain poor and captured through technology. With this in mind, can the presenter completely write off the fear of AR black box? So the issue of ethics and how we can inform it in the commercialization of technologies.
Sure. I think to the first part of that question around how do we make sure that we exercise sort of our agency as people. That's a funny question, because agency presumes that we can already act. Agency is not something that you were given by a government or some overseeing God. And this is where I get enormously frustrated around the issues of mindset and behaviors, because things like, acting on your agency, taking initiative, having an internalized locus of control, these are things that are developed through life experiences and overcoming challenges. And you cannot go and ask for agency. At the end of the day, as students coming out of UCT, we used Google to teach ourselves everything that we needed to know about how to set up a business, how to build this voice over IP software that we wanted to build, how to hire and fire people, how to set up legal contracts. No one gave us agency, and this is the big thing that we need to do in our mindset shift, is that we can already act. Most people on this event today can already act, to choose to learn more, to leverage technology to improve whatever they're currently doing so that they can ultimately serve more people at a lower cost. And so I really must turn that around to say that we can't be saying that government must give us agency. This is the mindset shift that I'm saying we need to sort of move past. And to your latter sort of question around, can we really say that we can sort of push aside that fear? For as long as we don't tackle the skills and challenge on our continent, there will be real challenges for us to be able to get the benefits of AI. As I mentioned, I think that adaptability is going to be key to impart to everyone, and that requires that people have basic literacy and numeracy. It requires that they have access to information and have the mental thinking models to process information. And they need to be part of that digital economy, have mobile handsets, have internet broadband. Without any of those things, people cannot even begin to act on their agency. They cannot begin to find opportunities. They cannot begin to improve themselves and improve their life conditions. Without addressing those things, then yes, most certainly there must be fear. And for me, it's important that we realize that there's pillars that we need to erect so that we can leverage the best of these new technologies.
Yeah, so last two questions for you, Rapelang. One from Kolelwa Kashe Katia, who is concerned about the evolution towards development. Should we not view this transition to 4IR as an opportunity to determine new ways of thinking about development towards setting the new standards that are meaningful for Africans? And I think this dovetails very well with the question from Pumzi Pala, who says, what will the fifth industrial revolution look like? Is it possible for South Africa and Africa at large to be at the forefront, or are we doomed to always be followers? Those two last questions for you,
Yes,
Rapella.
yes. Remind me the previous one again. I've already
Oh,
forgotten.
yeah, she was saying that shouldn't Africans
oh, yes, yes. Okay, I think I
be the
remember
determinants
yes.
of their own
Sure.
development through the evolution of
And
4R?
yeah, I think those questions connect quite well. I'm definitely a person that believes that we can architect prosperity. In the same way, poverty that we see on the continent was architected by apartheid, colonialism, and a whole lot of our history. We must recognize that prosperity can be architected. And I believe that the power of technologies today is finally able to match our imagination of the things that we can build and produce. And we now need to shift into that gear of architecting that prosperity. And if we take on that agency, take on that initiative, we can significantly improve the outcomes of many people on this continent. But again, agency is something you take. It's not something that you're given. And to the second part of your question, that I'm trying to remember again now.
What would be the nature of the fifth industrial revolution?
Yes, the nature
and
of the
shouldn't
fifth.
we be leaders in determining that and not followers, as has been the case with the other revolutions?
Sure. Certainly, we have been followers in previous revolutions, and when we look at how Asian countries leveraged previous industrial revolutions, by being proactive, having a coordinated response, upskilling people, they were able to change an entire trajectory of a generation and a country. And we can't afford to miss this opportunity as a continent again, because these opportunities don't come often, and when you miss it, you lose an entire generation. So yes, we've got to capitalize on it. I don't consider myself a futurist, so I don't like to extrapolate on, what will the fifth industrial revolution be about. I think in many ways, we've already come up with murky definitions for the fourth one, and I wouldn't focus so much on what we label it. At the end of the day, technology has always been about how do we break existing constraints in the problems that we face, and how can we use technology to break those constraints, to deliver services more affordably, provide services to a broader reach and a wider range of people. And when we look at it that way, it doesn't matter if it's the first or the second or the fourth or the fifth revolution. It was always about breaking constraints so that we can do things faster, better, and more efficiently.
Thank you very much, and really for that brilliant keynote address. For me, technology is an aid for the betterment of the quality of human life. And any technology at any revolution, if it attains that, and it does that in a humane way, and it doesn't lead to further and further inequality, it shall be embraced. Otherwise, it shall be protested against and never come to pass. But thank you. That brings to an end our very enlightening conversation that Rapellang put together for us, a brilliant keynote address, which I hope everybody has enjoyed. And I really appeal to you, Rapellang, as a foremost expert in this field, to start thinking about the language of conversation and challenge you and others to really develop these types of presentations in the languages that our people can access and can respond to, because they are really, really important for them to reach.
Challenge accepted. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we shall now go into another session. We're going to our breakaway sessions. These are what we call techno shops. We have three topics that participants can choose from. The first one being arts and humanity. And the question, or rather the point here is that art is a hallmark trait of humanity. Therefore, can artificial intelligence ever replace creativity and replace human artists? This breakaway session, this techno shop, will be facilitated by Matt Maralak, who is from the African Leadership Academy. The second one is bio and nanotechnology. Over the next decade, bio and nanotechnology will contribute to widespread technological transformation, affecting the productivity and development of myriad applications, from new multifunctional materials to disease diagnostics, water purification, and energy efficiency. As it does, there are concerns that it could become a technology of the rich and help widen social and economic disparities. This is the conversation that will take place in this techno shop that will be facilitated and led by Dr. Stephen Mufamadi, who's Managing Director of Nabio Consulting. The last one is Systems of Knowledge Production in the 4IR. History shows that humanity has always strived to add to the already existing body of knowledge, making it a signature of modernity. The participants in this session focus on systems of knowledge production that are encompassing and accommodative to alternative sources of knowledge, such as indigenous knowledge systems. It was quite a laugh for me when I saw the video clip posted by Professor Chirizima Rwala. He is the Deputy Chairperson of the Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission for South Africa, and VC of University of Johannesburg. He posted a clip on Facebook the other day showing an old lady who was busy doing a traditional ceremony of venerating the ancestors to convince them to change the passmark of a grandson who had received a lower than average passmark. She was calling upon the machines of the University of Johannesburg to make some magic to make sure that that mark changes to a positive mark. And it made me laugh to think that we may be talking about nanotechnology, 4IR, and not realize that our people believe that there is a higher technology of ancient times that they can call up to when they find difficulties in time. So hopefully that will go into the conversation about alternative modes of knowledge production, the epistemology of the content of 4IR. And that's going to be facilitated by Arthur Goldstack, Managing Director of Worldwide Works. So here's how this is going to work. If you look into your chat box, you will see that there is a link to these breakaway sessions, these techno shops. That link will lead you to the 3 different topics and breakaway sessions. You can then click on the one that you would like to participate in, and then it will take you straight away to that techno workshop, and your facilitator will be ready waiting for you. Please remember that if you want to pose questions, you need to type out your question on Q&A, and I think this time you have the option of doing so on the chat box as well. The facilitators are going to do a 5-minute lightning presentation, which will then be followed by questions and answers. After the techno workshops, we shall return for our last plenary session back here at the main event. Thank you very much, and I hope you stay with us as we go into the next sessions. While we go to our techno workshops, please take a listen and look at this video while you choose your different workshops to go into. Thank you so much.
One of the things that's run through all of my practice has been a relationship with technology. I'm fascinated in how AI might actually develop the conversation around what is choreography, who has to make choreography, what are the potentials of choreography. And I guess that's how we started to work with Google.
At the Google Arts and Culture Lab, we bring artists, curators, together with engineers and creative technologists to experiment at the intersection of art and technology.
Hi, I'm Bastien. I'm a creative coder here at the lab. I've been involved in the machine learning and the interface as well.
So when we started working with Wayne, we were really interested about movement prediction. We found a research paper which was about handwriting prediction, and we think, what if we use that for predicting dance movement? We use the archive from Wayne to train the algorithm so they can use this data to generate movement.
When I'm working with dancers normally, what I'm asking them to do through their own creativity is make iterative versions of an idea that I might have proposed. What this tool does for each little moment is do 400,000 iterations of that, yeah? So the canvas is way, way bigger. We had to gift the archive, and it was a huge archive, you know, it's thousands of hours of video to be analysed. What this tool allows us to do is go, okay, I'm starting with this phrase. I would like the machine learning tool, the AI, to invent the next phrase, but in the style of Jordan, or in the style of Jess. And then you can get combinations of those. And then it's learning all the time and feeding back. And so this iterative version gives you all of these new possibilities you couldn't have imagined. The phenomenal thing about this, it's in real time. You know, this transaction of energy between computer or interface and live body is really swift.
And what I think is really interesting is it's not creating a copy of what's before. It's not finding something else in the archive and matching that. It's creating something totally original.
I can see in the future this kind of performance experiment, which I'd be really interested in doing live on stage, because I think part of the experience of creating something with the use of AI and an AI form that makes a novel dance that's never been danced before is that actually you see that working in a kind of a collaborative environment. And so I'd love to see that on stage.
In the next 30 minutes, we will be discussing how artificial intelligence intersects with the arts and builds towards an attempt at answering the question, can artificial intelligence replace artists and human creativity? So let me introduce myself very quickly. My name is Matt Marilak, and I'm a recent WITS graduate with an MA in Cultural Policy and Management, currently employed at the African Leadership Academy here in Johannesburg. Fundamentally, my interests are all things cultural and creative industries, policy making, leadership, and governance of the arts and cultural sector. So just to run down how this webinar is going to be structured, I will use the next 5 to 7 minutes to give context to the discussion, and we will then proceed to questions for the remaining time. So please feel free to use the raise your hand, Q&A, or chat functionality in Zoom, and I will do my very best to answer these as they come in. So 4 key points that I'd like to discuss and elaborate on as we build and start off this discussion. And the first is, why is it necessary to even think about this intersection between the arts and artificial intelligence?
The of writing about it and researching it gives my organization a unique perspective, because you have access to people who are driving the fourth industrial revolution, as well as an understanding of the way it is being used on the ground or who is using it. But it's important to understand that the fourth industrial revolution is not a single entity. It's not a technology. It's a set of technologies that in combination are being used to drive information systems, knowledge, and production, for that matter, forward. So when we conduct research into the fourth industrial revolution, we are really, we are really researching the technologies underlying the fourth industrial revolution. And these include areas like artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, robotics, and that includes software and hardware robotics, and virtual reality and augmented reality, among a few others. Cloud computing, which has been around for a while now, we believe forms to the Pan-African context.
So basically, I sort of like try to put this bio-nanotechnology divided into two, because it's biotechnology and nanotechnology. So it's about like bio and nanotechnology. So I thought, like, let me just sort of like define these two things so people can get familiar with what are these things. Bio nanotechnology, as we all know, this is not something new. It's been there for a while now. But bio nanotechnology dealing with the manipulations of molecular and biology systems, processes to make or to modify products. So both biotechnology and nanotechnology, they deal with manipulations, but just different type of manipulations. While in nanotechnology manipulation here, we're talking about the creations or manipulation of chemical or physical properties. So the difference is that the bio, it's biologically or molecular system, while in nano, it's more of chemical and physical properties being manipulated. And in nano, we come to the issue of finding a product that are in a nanoscale or molecular scales or molecular level, which is just basically 1 to 100 nanometer. So because today I'm going to talk about bio-nanotechnology, I thought, let me just sort of like give a little bit of a view about what are the advantages of this convergence to combining nano and biotechnology, because this is one of the biggest challenges right now. I think most of people who are researchers that are working that are currently working on either nano or biotechnology, they find it very difficult sometimes to publish their work, because sometimes you want to publish your article in biotechnology, but you don't know whether the article belongs to bio or nano. But because of this technology, they sort of like overlap each other, and as a result, they become like they are more like a convergence, which basically now, instead of say biotechnology or nanotechnology, you can combine both of them together and say bio-nanotechnology or nanobiotechnology or nanobiology. These are the kind of terminology that when you're doing a search online, you find them. Either bio-nanotechnology, nanobiotechnology, nanobiology. I think it depending who is talking, if it's a biologist, probably we'll call it nanobiotechnology. Biotech will call it bio-nanotechnology, depending on who's talking. But let me just continue. The role of nanotechnology in this convergence basically is to equip biotechnology with the tools of materials that can interact directly with the biological molecules. Which, what is that supposed to mean? Basically, it's like nanotechnology, it gives a platform to a biology or biological scientist to now able to measure or interact or characterize something at a single biological event. So instead of like you just have like a massive or bulk result or bulk activity, which you're not sure what's really happening. Now the advantage of nanotechnology, it creates a platform where now you've got an opportunity for able to understand what's happening in a single biological event. So basically, like if you've got a billion of cells, you're likely to know what's happening in a single cell. So this kind of things, the combination of nano and bio or the convergence, it opened a big opportunity in terms of in a medical side, where now we are able to do things like early detections. Early detections, it's something that I find it very interesting. Early detection is now, it's a situation whereby you are likely to know you've got a disease before you have the symptoms. I mean, we are all familiar with the issue of now of COVID-19. COVID-19, sometimes when you've got COVID-19, you have to wait for a certain period of time. I think previously it was about 15 days, now it's around 9-10 days, somewhere there. But you have to wait for all those days. The reason why you're waiting for your body to accumulate enough virus. So basically, in a simple terms, it's like you're waiting for virus to multiply. You're waiting for virus to multiply so that you can able to have enough data to characterize, because when you're analyzing this result using a traditional method like other PCR, you require a lot of virus to be present within either your sample, for any of your sample, or you need like enough biomarker. You need like a biomarker. I don't know, someone is raising a question. Maybe I should sort of like answer this when I finish presenting. Can you sort of like wait for me to finish all the question, the presentation, so we can have a session for Q&A?
Advancement and artificial intelligence. But I'd like to highlight two main points. The first is that of intellectual property. Potential changes in its definition are imminent, particularly in answering the question of whether a machine can or will have the legal personality to hold intellectual property rights. This, of course, assumes that machines are autonomous, but it perhaps does introduce a new category of intellectual property legislature that would need to be engaged with as industries adopt more and more algorithmic methods of creative production. I say this to highlight the issue of ownership. So for the future of arts and cultural policy, ownership of content, regulation, and protection of artist royalties, for instance, is a necessity moving forward. Some of you may know that South Africa is awaiting the Copyright Amendment Bill number 13 of 2017, being signed by our President Cyril Ramaphosa. This bill is an amendment to the Copyright Act of 1978 with significant changes, particularly in light of digital distribution, to its fair usage and fair dealing clauses. What CEO of Juta and Company, Kamal Patel, stated, the broadest changes, these changes are the broadest changes that the industry has ever seen. And the delay, therefore, has come as a result of the Publishers Association of South Africa, PASA, pushing back the bill to be reevaluated. The claim that the Department of Trade and Industry had drafted the bill without conducting an economic impact study of its proposed provisions on the creative publishing sector, which is argued to effectively decrease the compensation of rights owners. Not to get too caught up in the detail of it, it does seem that the role of the future of arts and culture policy is not only to help society adopt to new forms of cultural production and distribution, but also to protect the rights of artists and creatives as copyright owners. So this is achieved by cultural considerations being included within the process of updating bills such as the Copyright Amendment Bill as digital innovation continues to strengthen. Finally, on this point, the future of arts and culture policy needs to address artificial intelligence and the risk of perpetuating the digital divide in advocating for equitable access to ICT infrastructure, particularly for artists and creatives, as digital becomes the sector's new performance platform. So with that said, I'd like to segue into the very last point, which is that of socioeconomic development and protection. And this is essentially with the thought of the advancement of technology and artificial intelligence, both having the potential to close socioeconomic gaps in our society, but equally, it has the potential to exacerbate them. To quote the scholar Bandeli, he stated, and I quote, "Being prepared to deal with the controversial technologies developed now is the only way."
As it's become embedded in IoT, CSIR was a leader in this space at one time. RFID is radio frequency identification, and that is where you can put a tag into any item and it can be scanned automatically. And I do remember CSIR's experiments in RFID very well. One of the tests, or one of the proofs of concept, was that they developed a technology where every item that was put into a shopping trolley could be pushed through the checkout and automatically scanned. It would have to be pushed relatively slowly while all the items were picked up by the scanner, because the scanner couldn't do it instantaneously. That was in theory, and also in testing, it worked. But the moment you try to do it in practice, the whole system fell apart. It didn't, in fact, work in the real world. Firstly, because it took too long and there were too many errors. The RFID readers couldn't pick up all the products. Some were mislabeled electronically, so the wrong information was picked up and the like. So this, in fact, highlighted the extent to which any of these technologies is really part of an ecosystem. The RFID system that CSIR were experimenting with was an ecosystem that included the tags themselves, the scanners, and then the information that was installed or inserted or injected into the tags, and then also the platform that the scanners use to import that information and turn it into intelligible information. So the reality was that you had an information ecosystem that didn't work. The technology works, but you need a fairly complex information ecosystem to enable the technology. And in fact, Rodwin, it's a good example of knowledge production in 4IR, because it shows the extent to which knowledge is part of a platform and part of an ecosystem. It doesn't occur almost naturally and have a life of its own without being part of that platform or ecosystem or environment. Then Norma Moyo asked, what are some of the skills that one must have in order to fully participate in the knowledge economy? That's an excellent question, because the assumption that many make is that the skills of the knowledge economy are technology skills, that you have to be able to program and the like. And I'd like to come back to that in a moment, the idea that we all have to learn programming as the new language. But first, I want to address Norma's question very specifically. And in fact, there's a very clear understanding that the fourth industrial revolution doesn't require skills around technology, but rather skills around how one addresses problems and solves those problems. And just today, interestingly enough, I received a press release from a company called VM, which is involved in managing information in the cloud. And they were saying that even though there is relevance to learning technological skills, increased emphasis must be placed on the importance of soft skills related to human attributes that will differentiate people from their robotic counterparts. And now this is the key part. This really answers your question.
The mask remain effective. The advantage about this mask is that they are coated with nanomaterials, and these materials, when they come direct with the virus, they can kill the virus immediately, because the materials that are there, they have got an antiviral activity, so they can kill the virus once they have contact with the virus. And then you also have masks that can self-charge. You can charge them with electricity, and then you can be able to clean them through the charging them with electricity. Some of the things that's very interesting. And also some surface disinfectants that you can have disinfected that can prolong, protections of the surface environment. Instead of just spraying every day, like sanitizer, you sanitize every day. You can disinfect it, which you can just spray just one time, and then you leave it it can sustain for more than up to 70 days. Some they've claimed that they've discovered which can last for more than even a year, with just one disinfectant, which can benefit a lot when it comes to the issue of our mode of transport, our homes, our doors and everything. I think those are some of them that can benefit. You can also some of people already showing with the COVID-19 that they can able to screen COVID within less than 20 minutes using some nano device. And then one of the things that's also very important is some drugs that are coming on board. There are a couple of them. I just only show this gene therapy, which is sRNA, that they already in a certain level where they're now, I think they're approaching towards clinical trials in order to see whether these can really work in terms of treating COVID or not. And another part which is very, very interesting, it's a vaccine. One of the things that nanotechnology is playing a role is bringing the next gen vaccine. I call them the new gen vaccine because these are the vaccine that never existed before. The RNA and the DNA, they've never been existed in terms of human treatment or they've never been used. It's only nanotechnology that's making sure that now we see this drug coming to market. And one of the things that's very interesting, like the first vaccine to enter into human trials, it was basically made out of nanomaterials, which is this one, the 1273 vaccine. That's one of the vaccines that was first entered into human clinical trials in the world. This is the first one, and it's one of those that are in phase 3. Phase 3 is almost the last stage of vaccines. Once if it works, now it means it can go to be consumed by humans. And we have got many of them. I just showed these few of them that are the one that are specific because of I was talking about convergence, I thought about, let me just talk about the one that are using proteins and the one that is DNA and RNA. All of those, they are already on the clinical trials using nanomaterials as a delivering vehicles. So other people may want to know whether if these nanomaterials are safe or not safe, or what a danger of nanomaterials. Nanomaterials, just like nanotechnology, just like any other technology, it always comes with challenges or opportunities. The nanotechnologies or nanotechnology is one of the emerging technology. There's still a lot that are not known. But what I myself as a nanotech, I know what are the challenges when it comes to nano. I think one of the challenges that are in nano is basically the material that you're using, depending the toxicity or the danger about nano. It's based on the type of materials you're using. And secondly, in the recent paper that was published, it was already showed that by Imperial College
to review our cultural policy, and even longer to really have artists feel its interventions. So that's just my view on South African arts and culture policy, that it has been, for the most part, a reactive process, and that artists, I think, have lost a lot of faith in policy making and state institutions, particularly in the arts sector. I do know that there is a new policy that's been adopted by the Portfolio Committee in Parliament. That was in February this year. And there are mentions of digital within the reviewed policy. So I'm really hoping that government implements the policy well, and that we don't have a repeat of it taking long to review, because I think, as you so rightly stated in your question, technology is changing so quickly, so that to me means that policy needs to be reviewed more often. So I think that we can only remain hopeful about policy serving us as citizens, not only in South Africa, but on the continent, and that we can see it work towards the sector developing more and more. So I hope that answered your question, Alina. I'm going to move on to Deirdre Pretorius. Thank you for your question, Alina, by the way. Deirdre, you're asking, what is your view, or my view, on artificial intelligence and its impact on magazine and book publishing? Very interesting question. So interestingly, there are advancements and developments in AI being able to actually write. So it's not as cohesive and as emotive, obviously, as a human being could write. But I think we can look forward to quicker turnaround times in the publishing space, with artificial intelligence being able to calculate and generate writing texts. Obviously, I think the value chain and the publishing sort of pipeline of still needing to check the work would need to be strengthened. But I think we can look forward to quicker turnaround times. And also, I'm very interested in the distribution of texts and magazines, books, etc., with the advent of
frameworks for knowledge. We are running into the last few minutes of the session, and are there any more questions that are left unanswered before we wrap up? I think we've answered all the questions that are open still. The questions are actually very big questions. Malose, your question is, in fact, one of the great challenges of knowledge production in South Africa, and for all emerging markets for that matter. And the other questions as well, Norma and Rodwin's questions, are critical questions. So my answers aren't the only answers. I must stress that. These are all questions that can be debated at great length. And I urge the participants in this discussion to pursue the debate around those questions. If there are no other questions, then I'm going to wrap up very broadly by talking about the significance of a platform for knowledge storing and for knowledge creation that is available to everybody, and it's cloud computing. The very fact that you're accessing this event means that you have access to the cloud, because a Zoom webinar is in effect an event presented via the cloud. So you are accessing information via the cloud. When you put comments into the chat box, or when you ask a question, you're actually contributing to the information that is being produced in the cloud. So this is actually a system of knowledge production, but at a very rudimentary level. We're not necessarily storing the knowledge that is coming out of this. I would hope that it is being stored and recorded, and that would mean that every question that is answered is contributing to further knowledge. But the point I'm really making here is that when you start learning what is available in the cloud and the tools that are available in the cloud, you start understanding just how far you can leverage the cloud in order to promote the production and use of knowledge as well. Again, I emphasize.
Thank you for that comment, Muzi. I absolutely agree with you. I think we are definitely going to be seeing more technology in live performances as well, not just virtual performances, but holographics as an example, or holograms within live performances. I think will become more and more prevalent and more accepted as part of a high-end live experience for an audience member. So very keen to see our musicians and theater makers as well make use of technology and how they coexist. I see we have another comment from Zenzo. Zenzo, if you'll allow me, I'll go to the next one as our last. Okay, we still have some time. Let's see how far we go. Someone new, a new voice to the conversation. I'm going to look at Teboho Sejane. She says, or he says, you mentioned in your intro that one of the areas of interest, or one of the areas of interest for me is leadership. What, in your view, is the role of leadership at all levels in transitioning South Africa to fully optimize 4IR and particularly AI in dealing with complexities in society? Wow. Thank you for that question, Teboho. I think that I think one of the biggest challenges in AI and technology becoming more accepted as a reality in our lives from a day-to-day basis is the issue of fear. And I know that has been spoken about by the keynote, and I think that's something that leadership particularly has to address, is the fear that comes with not understanding something new. And that certainly is the case with technology and artificial intelligence. So I think leadership's role is to firstly understand the opportunities for society and for, in our case, South Africa, and to also walk alongside citizens in understanding how they can benefit from these opportunities, and also putting resource towards the development of, I mentioned earlier, curriculum. I mentioned, or I'd like to mention, skills, upskilling existing artists and new artists in the space, as well as protecting artists. I think that's the role that leadership should play in assisting South Africa transition to optimize 4IR and optimize artificial intelligence. Protection is a huge problem. and something that we don't quite have our bearings on about it. I think that leadership definitely has to play a role in protecting artists from being exploited. So I hope that answers your question, Teboho. Let's see how much time we have. We have like a minute left. Let's see if we can take one more question.
And a platform that worked very well with the community. Some of these platforms that I think that are more important for me, I think, is to try to communicate with a language that people understand, vernacular. You know, if we were to bring this science terminology in a vernacular concept where people can understand, because they already know these things, but they don't understand it in scientific language. I mean, this is something that I was just talking with my friend yesterday. We were saying, like, there was a question by Mbeki talking about what is xenophobia in African language, and we don't even know what is that supposed to mean. But I think, like, we still really need to find a way to communicate our science subject in a vernacular language so that people can understand. Because some of these things that we're talking about, like, oh, my grandmother, they're cooking beer every day, cooking tombuchi. You know, this is biotechnology, you know, but the person has no idea what is biotechnology, but they are busy cooking every day, you know, they're cooking a lot of things, but they're not familiar that what they're doing is already biotechnology. So I think for me, it's just an issue of creating more awareness where we can able to find our communications, changing the game in terms of communication, whereby now we can try to influence, we can influence the vernacular to be used in our community radio stations in which we live. We have a lot of community radio stations now where people can able to communicate through those platforms. So I feel like those are the kind of thing that we need to do. There's another one who wanted to ask question here. Let me just ask this one a platform to ask question. What is the question all about?
A follow-up. Available technologies. And I hope it does ultimately become a tool that adequately responds to the needs of the sector. So I think we've come to the end of the Arts and Humanities Techno workshop. So I'd just like to draw everyone's attention to the chat. There is a link in the chat that will allow you to join the main group. So please feel free to open up the chat and click on that link. I hope this was insightful, and I certainly hope that you enjoy the rest of our programming this afternoon. Cheers, everybody.
You know, I know SAPRA, they're working on all these kind of policies, including the issue of regulation of nanotechnology, particularly for this vaccine that are coming on board. So definitely they are platforms that they're working on. So maybe just to get the last one now, Zama, can I ask you a question before we close? Zama, are you there? Guys, because I don't know, someone, it seems like people are shy. I don't know if they're shy or not, but anyway, guys, thank you so much for this. You feel free to send me questions via my email address. My email address is @gmail.com. Feel free to send me any question. I'm willing to, I will be able to answer this question through the, just not because I'm worrying about time now, because probably you guys have to move to the next session. And then anyway, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed those breakaway sessions, and I hope that they were quite meaningful to all the participants in terms of this major revolution that is facing us. I think that one of the biggest takeouts of our convention today is how we can impact 4IR. How do we, as human beings, as society, impact the emergence of the fourth industrial revolution, as opposed to how we've always looked at it, which is how 4IR is going to impact us. It's quite clear from the different speakers and participants that we need to set the agenda according to our own unique conditions as to how we want to embrace 4IR and how we would like 4IR to be an enabler of the changes that need to take place in our society. How to harmonize human interaction with the intelligent machines that everyone has told us are now going to perform some of the functions and duties that are currently being performed by human beings. The role that human beings will play in infusing some level of ethics and values, value systems that currently in conversation, human beings are able to engage one another about. If machines cannot enter into that conversation, the ones who implant the intelligence, the ones who transmit the intelligence into these machines needs to be mindful of that gap and find a way of closing it. I would like to, at this stage, announce that MISTRA, the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, is calling upon those with the know-how to participate in a competition for the book cover of this upcoming publication on 4IR, which MISTRA is involved in. The topic of the book at the moment is African Perspectives on 4IR. African Perspectives on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So if you know anybody who is a good designer, it may be a student, it may be your sons and daughters, relatives, or just some entrepreneurs that are quite good and they are interested in influencing images of the content inside this book, they are more than welcome to follow through the website of MISTRA to establish when this competition will kickstart. The MISTRA website is mistra.org. So if you can just keep tracking mistra.org, they will there post the competition for the book cover. MISTRA has got a number of book publications. One that is most relevant to our topic of today is Beyond Nanotechnology. So please go look out for that publication, which MISTRA has also produced, which is most relevant in any topic related to the fourth industrial revolution. So now we are going to go into our last plenary session for the day, and I hope that it will be as riveting and enlightening as the others have been. This plenary session is entitled From the Margins to the Center. There are concerns about the danger of 4IR discourse being elitist. For the 4IR to be truly positively transformative, policy must cater for the needs of all stakeholders. The casualties of past industrial revolutions are women, people living with disabilities, the poor, and other marginalized groups. The participants in this session imagine what a just and equitable fourth industrial revolution will look like and the strategies that can be deployed to navigate challenges to avoid history repeating itself. How we are going to go about this session is we have 3 esteemed panelists and a facilitator. The session will be facilitated by Ms. Mamkheti Mulopiane, who's a mining labor analyst and contributor to the MISTRA book publication on 4IR. Ms. Mamkheti Mulopiane will lead the discussions in this session and she will moderate the input of the following speakers. We have in this panel Professor Erika Kramer-Mbula, who is Professor of Economics and Co-Director of MISTRA, Fourth Industrial Revolution publication. We also have Dr. Bukosi Marevate, Senior Lecturer, Department of Computer Science at the University of Pretoria. He also contributes to the MISTRA publication book. And then lastly, we have Mr. Kuda Hobe, a policy officer with Privacy International. I will now hand over to you, Ms. Mamkheti Mlopiane, to facilitate this last plenary session of our convention. Ms. Mlopiane.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction, Chilidzi. And hello, everybody, and welcome wherever you're joining us in Africa and the world. These discussions come at such an interesting time in what is happening globally, but in the context of what Africa is going through, the transformations that it's going through. So it is important for us to get on this issue. And as the theme of the discussion says, Maru Apula, that opportunities are coming. But of course, it is only if you are prepared for such an opportunity that you can make the most out of it. But also in Setswana, there's a saying that it is those who are prepared for rain that get to reap the rewards of the rain that has passed. So without further ado, I will ask Professor Kramer-Mbula to tell us the books, the 4IR book treatment in terms of the existing marginalization. To what extent is 4IR relevant to sub-Saharan Africa, and how and where is there a large where there is a large informal economy? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this panel, and also for the moderator of the session for guiding us through the discussion. So, good afternoon, everybody. There are many forecasts of the capacity of automation and artificial intelligence to replace a lot of workers very fast. So we are familiar with those scary forecasts. They suggest generally bad news for Africa and South Africa in particular, given the concentration in types of low-skilled jobs that might be easy to automate, especially in a context where few jobs already exist in the formal economy. Also, the limited progress that we are having in terms of industrialization, particularly advanced manufacturing, limits the job creation opportunities that come along with that, which is an issue of concern. So this concern must be taken. These concerns must be taken seriously, together with the skill shortages and so on. We're all familiar with that discussion, but we must also take them cautiously, and they must be evidence-based. And the evidence must be based on the reality that surrounds us, including not only the challenges, but also opportunities. And some of those opportunities may be hidden, so to speak, in stakeholder groups that are predominant in our society, such as women, youth, informal actors, which we see as perhaps victims of the fourth industrial revolution. We must see them perhaps as assets that we can mobilize and activate towards achieving the future that we want. I must say that concerns about the impact of the labor displacing effects of technology are not new. They've been around for about half a century, and we've been looking at the possibilities of mass job losses coming from automation of various types, including the widespread use of computers. We were expecting that many jobs would be lost, but many jobs were lost, but new jobs were also created and new sectors emerged. So we need to also take that into consideration in terms of our response and our the effects of the fourth industrial revolution in our context. As it was mentioned by the presenter earlier, something that is different this time is that we've learned from earlier industrial revolutions or technological waves, however we want to call them. We know that if we don't pay attention to the social exclusion and inequality that may take place out of the deployment of and the widespread use of these technologies, we will pay a very high price. And this is something of great concern for developing countries in general and South Africa in particular. So to ensure that we maximize the positives, we must have not only reactive but also proactive policy approaches to both prevent and mitigate the impact, particularly on the lives of those with low wages, including the informal economy and vulnerable communities. And just to conclude, how does this look like? And just in a couple of sentences, an inclusive approach to 4IR can take many different forms. It can relate to the promotion of truly inter and transdisciplinary knowledge creation, ensuring that communities participate in the generation of research outputs and knowledge that relate to the design and the implementation of new technologies. It can relate to the development of new talent and much-needed technical skills that we need to prepare the youth, but also about repurposing and reorienting some of the existing skills and various tech and non-tech fields to put them at the service of building 4IR-related knowledge. It can relate to practical approaches to supporting digital infrastructure and digital technologies in informal settlements or disadvantaged areas. It can relate to creating institutional frameworks through participatory processes, platforms that capture the needs of those marginalized to ensure that the needs are reflected in policy approaches. So this is the point that I wanted to finish with. It's not one action, it's a set of actions that will lead us to a more inclusive outcome of the 4IR. It's a systemic change, and it has to do with multiple interrelated, overlapping dimensions that need to be reoriented and transformed for us to achieve the future that we want by harnessing the 4IR technologies.
Thank you, Prof. Interesting insights. More importantly, the terms, the language, the words used. For the ordinary South African, Dr. Vukosi, I'm coming to you. 4IR is often guilty or perceived as guilty of being too technical, too elitist, too over the heads of an ordinary people that it is affecting in society. Example, give us a brief introduction of what do we mean in the context of 4IR by artificial intelligence in a language that if somebody's watching or has joined this session in a rural village or anywhere in South Africa, in Africa really, will understand it, but also will see that it directly has an impact on their lives. So Dr. Vukosi, what do we mean by artificial intelligence?
Thank you, Mamuketi, and also thanks to all the panelists and also MISTRA for hosting this. As the chair of data science at the University of Pretoria, I sit and I teach all the time, and I look into some of these emerging technologies that have to do with the fourth industrial revolution. From my past, I've been trained in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And in order for us to really reap these tech optimism or these rewards from the fourth industrial revolution, we need to make sure we do actually have a common understanding across society, not just for the technical experts, as Mamuketi has alluded to, but then for the wider public as well. So for me, I want to say within here, let's look at 4 rungs. So one being understanding. Yes, we can explain artificial intelligence very simply. It literally is, from a classical definition, it's in a way you build a machine. This machine lives in the world that we're in. It is allowed to take actions. And then from there, it tries to take those actions to meet some goal, right? In some way, you can think about search engines, which most people now use, where you type in a word or a phrase, and you're trying to search for something. That machine is a search engine. It lives on the internet. It goes out there and takes all all these websites and results, and then tries to show you the ones that are the most relevant. In the same way, we can think about more down to earth, I think, a robot or a traffic light in South Africa. It sits there. The actions that it takes is just that it changes color from one to the other, but it might need to make decisions on how long it should actually wait between changing, given the traffic, right? That now we have sensors bringing in these IoT in a way. And more importantly is the concept of machine learning, where now you say, how do we create this intelligence in a way? And in machine learning, what is very important is that we then give a machine data or examples of what it actually should be doing, and it learns from those examples, right? That's why we call it machine learning. Now, this is very important because people tend to think, again, of 4IR or AI or machine learning as being something that is very far away. It's an aspiration that we have. But that could be further from the truth. This is something that is with us right now. we have changed in the way that we interact with our world, because we are mostly connected now through networks, through communication networks, through the internet, through services like WhatsApp, for example. And all of these services, one way or another in the back end, are using AI and machine learning tools to give you responses, give you extra features and all those things. Because of this, I actually argue that already you as an individual are part human and part machine, because we are at the point where you can't see, even I think in even rural areas, living without these systems in a way, because they actually augment our lives. But then this becomes very important that if they are here, the big challenge that we have on the African continent is that we are not the ones who are building. And this is the biggest part of us going into this revolution where we're more globalized, but we aren't actually building and shaping these technologies. And if we don't do that, we really do stand the risk, I think, of really being left behind way more than we think of the prior industrial revolutions.
Thank you, Bohosi. I'll come to Mr. Kuda. You know, these conversations about 4IR are important, that they are framed in the right language, but also they're simplified. I believe that information such as this and knowledge mustn't be exclusive, but also must always be filtered where possible so that everybody can understand it. So, Mr. Kuda, data algorithm, there could be an opportunity for social impact in that. And more importantly, we now live in a society where we are seeing that there is a monopoly over data, and it has become a commodity that private entities are holding on to it. We have seen throughout the global north. How is this applicable? And African states can glean from the experience of the relevance of data and algorithms and put it in their policy formulation in such a way that it not only speaks to their needs, but it is not something that is prescribed from outside, that they are impacting it and they are not impacted by it.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you to all the other speakers that have spoken before me. The issue that you raise about the value of data or the value of information is very real. This time, this age that we're living in is often referred to as the digital age or the information age. And that goes to show that all the processes that we are engaged in, as soon as we switch on an electronic or digital device, all turn around the processing, the inputting, and the production of information. Whether that information is personal information like your banking details or your name, your age, your religious beliefs, that information can be monetized by someone with enough time, with enough processing. Sometimes the processing is to the consumer's advantage or convenience, and other times it's not. We've seen how information or data has been manipulated, especially around the election cycle, to convince people to vote in ways in which they otherwise would not have voted. So that said, to illustrate the power of the information that we share, it comes back to a call that we make as civil society that there should be safeguards, strong safeguards, which push back against the manipulation or exploitation of people's information and data. And that call should actually also be seen or replicated or echoed at government or state level as well. As much as CSOs would have the good intentions to push for the protection of or limitations on ways in which data is processed, CSOs do not have the power to implement policy. They do not have the power to introduce legislation and policy which guides these data processing activities. So that said, we're seeing African governments across the board, from developed countries such as South Africa to less developed countries in the region, such as maybe Zimbabwe or Malawi, they are introducing basic data protection laws, which unfortunately, by the time they're introduced and passed into active or effective law, are already some significant time behind technological developments, the very technological developments they try to regulate. So my advice, or responding to what you what you said, would be, yes, it is true for governments to dictate how they want the data of their citizens to be protected and processed, but it's also important for governments, first of all, to understand the value of that information so that they are motivated to take much more stronger and stringent steps in the regulation of those processes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for insightful inputs and interesting knowledge sharing that came out of this. I will ask a question to Professor. What options are open for African states to find ways in which policy design and policy response to 4IR, or the presumed or the anticipated technological unemployment, what pathways can there be for policy to be designed in such a way that not only does it respond or is it reactionary to the changes that are caused out of it, but it anticipates the changes that are going to happen in the labor market, the changes that are going to happen at a society level, in the social setting, in the community, but more importantly, at the regulation level. How do African states respond? Thank you, Professor. Okay.
A big thank you for that panel, and to all the panelists and our facilitator. I hope that this has nicely concluded our convention. And at this stage, I think it is safe to say that out of everything that we have dealt with this afternoon, the big warning that has come up is, let us be careful of the weaponization of artificial intelligence against humanity and the natural environment. I think there are great inputs here as to how we can navigate that to make sure that the fourth industrial revolution does not contribute to the feathering of the divide between the haves and the have-nots, does not contribute to gender inequality, to racial inequality, and regional inequality, or all the worldly injustices that we are already suffering. It is the conviction of our panelists, the experts who are working in this area of our transformation as a society, and the participants of this convention, that we've got to take charge and make sure that this new technology revolution becomes an enabler of our transformation rather than a catalyst of further inequality. At this stage, I would like to thank you very much, everybody who made this convention possible, the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflections LEAP 4.0 convention. First of all, thanks to the MISTRA team, this Institute for Strategic Reflection. You know, Mapungubwe prides itself in reflections about the future that is still to come, to think about the stepping stones that are necessary for us to reflect on that future long before it can happen. And I think the discussions on 4IR and impact on society are squarely within the agenda of this think tank called MISTRA. I would like to thank the Department of Science and Innovation for, again, once more, to thank them for sponsoring this project on 4IR and societal impact. I would like very humbly to give words of gratitude and thanks to our panelists, all of them, and our facilitators. I mean, it takes a lot to prepare for this kind of conference. Thank you for taking out the time and for sharing your experiences and knowledge with us. And most of all, to our participants. I mean, you could have chosen to do something else with your time. We are very, very grateful that instead you chose to be with us and took part in this convention today. All I can request is, please, let us continue with this discourse, and hopefully it can continue right there at the grassroots, influence the discussion and the conversation to happen in our communities, whether it be the townships, the rural communities, the hinterlands of our country, and the informal settlements. We want our people's voice to be heard. And the MISTRA team that was working on this convention, as well as the MISTRA management, I know that the Executive Director, Joel Neshitenje, was part, Dr. Oscar van Heerden, the MISTRA board members as led by Professor Villinkomo, MISTRA Council of Advisors as led by Mayor Geraldine Fraser Muleketi. I would like to thank all of you. And of course, in this world of the post-COVID-19 world of technology and virtual meetings and conferences and conventions, it wouldn't ever have been possible without our technical team that have made sure that this webinar and Zoom session is possible. So we give thanks to you, the team that is led by Ryan. Thank you very much. I think this is the end of our convention today, and we give great words of thanks and a round of applause to all of us. Enkosi nangomso.